Were you ever afraid to ask a question in class that you maybe wanted to ask? Today's gospel, the apostles are afraid to ask Jesus a question. And I think sometimes we're afraid because we don't want to look stupid, right? They're going to think that was a bad question. I have a friend, Father Kevin Finnegan. He was in a theology class all semester. He's from Edina. That's where he's pastor. And the whole semester, the priest was talking theology, and he was saying, God is the big being, B-E-I-N-G, and we are little beings, B-E-I-N-G-S. And for the whole semester, Father Finnegan, then just Kevin, was thinking he was saying bean, B-E-A-N. That God is the big bean, and we're little beans. And so finally, one of his classmates sitting next to him, corrected him, said, Kevin, he's saying being, not bean. And but Father Finnegan was unabashed. He raised his hand and he said, are you saying being or bean? And so the whole class could have a laugh. At 75% of the way through the class, he finally got it right. So anyway, we're sometimes afraid to ask because we're afraid what we're going to look like. And Jesus, he wants us to ask good questions, but also the right questions. And sometimes he says we ask wrongly. That's in our second reading today. He says, you do not receive because you do not ask, and you do not receive because you ask wrongly. Second reading from the letter of James. And what is the problem there? He says, well, you're asking because you're asking to fulfill your passions. Now, how many of you know what passions means? Well, passions is the part of our emotions and our desiring that gets disordered. It could be in order. Passions are a gift from God to have fear. Actually, God gave us a gift of fear because when we see a grizzly bear and we're afraid, it's a good thing. It says, move away, right? But fear can overtake us in a bad way. Or anger. We can get angry and we can erupt in a bad way. And so maybe there's a good anger that says, it's not right for somebody to treat another like that, and we get angry, and that should be a good, righteous anger, but we sometimes get angry in the wrong way. Desiring, jealousy, envy, those are the things that are listed in the second reading. When we're jealous of people, or we're envious of people, there's something that's not ordered there, something disordered. And we have to re-examine the heart, and he says, now, when you ask, don't ask to just fulfill your passions, your selfish ambition, that you would advance yourself, even maybe at the expense of others. But ask rightly. Well, what does it mean to ask rightly? For the sake of the common good, for servant leadership, for charity for a neighbor. To know wisdom. St. Solomon in the Old Testament asked for wisdom. And God said, you asked rightly. Because you wanted to do it as the king to serve the people. Well, we're invited to ask. Invited to ask. The apostles in the gospel, they were talking about who was the greatest, right? Have you ever thought that? Have you ever thought who's the greatest? I'm a greater baseball player than that guy? Or I'm a greater mathematician than that girl? We often do compare ourselves, and that's also part of the disorder. And if Jesus is the center, we don't have to have that comparison. Now, I want to just tell a little bit about Padre Pio, because today is his feast day, but he's sort of overturned by the Sunday. But St. Padre Pio had a startling desire that was really holy. At age 15, he joined religious life. At age 23, he was ordained a priest, Capuchin priest. And then one day, when he was 31, he wrote to his spiritual director. And he said to the spiritual director, I feel this passion First he says, I feel a desire, but it's growing so strong, I'm going to call it a passion. That's what he said. To suffer as a victim for souls in this life and in purgatory. The next day, he was praying in front of a crucifix, and he got the stigmata. The next day, which was September 20th, which is why his feast day is kind of around this time, September 23rd today. But Padre Pio had this desire welling up within him that was a gift of grace, and it was a heroic desire. He did many, many miracles in his life. He bilocated, so sometimes he was in two places at the same time. There was a Jewish man that came to him, that was brought to him for healing, who was blind. And the Jewish man's name was Lello Pegma. And Lello was brought there, and Padre Pio said, you want physical sight, but before physical sight, you should ask for spiritual sight. And he encouraged the man to get baptized. And so he did, and he came back, and then his blindness was healed, and he could see with his human eyes. So that man had his desire too for a gift of physical sight, but he needed to have the spiritual desire first. So today we're invited to consider our heart and the desires or the passions which are ordered or not ordered. And let's pray to God that He would help us order those. And I encourage you, by God's confidence, to ask what you would from the Lord.